The Penguin in this era of entertainment is exactly what viewers have been clamoring for. A well-written drama with complex characters that doesn't need any kind of crazy action set pieces, with lackluster action and spectacle that's stitched together with wonky CGI. The quality of the show is purely carried by the writing and the raw talent of its actors. That's the nitty-gritty of what everyone wants, and that's also the hardest to deliver because that takes true creativity and inspiration. The Penguin offers this, and in some areas, I think is truly remarkable. The main point for me, which I feel like is indisputably amazing, is the acting. Colin Farrell is wholly unrecognizable, and he completely transforms into Oswald Cobb. He's technically a villain, but Colin breathes so much humanity and emotion into the character, and you can't help but sympathize with him at times. There's a lot of nuance despite him being covered in makeup. It's truly a marvel how outstanding this performance is, and I think it's the major selling point of this series. And it's also rivaled by another standout performance coming from Kristen Milioti as Sofia Falcone, or Gigante I should say. She simultaneously portrays so much power and vulnerability in so many scenes. The complexity and emotional turmoil that's constantly rampaging across her face is a visual delight, and there's always a significant amount of detail on her face to be analyzed. Kristen delivers so much even without dialogue, and her character single-handedly imbues the show with a driving force that somehow hooks the audience into rooting for her. Her character-centric episode was by far my favorite, and completely changes your outlook on her from being this antagonist to a protagonist. It recontextualizes everything you knew about her, and even adds new meaning to her and Oswald's past scenes. The writing surrounding the main characters is phenomenal, and their dynamics are constantly fresh and exciting. Like, I loved the first half of the season where the relationship between Oswald and Sofia was drastically changing every episode. The narrative actually felt like it was evolving greatly, and the status quo was being shattered consistently. I think one of the best hallmarks for great character writing is if they have agency and the characters are driving the story forward. A lot of bad stories generally feel forced in the sense that the story is driving the characters to do things that they wouldn't realistically do. However, for the Penguin, these characters are making choices that have rippling actions that heavily influence the plot and other characters. It's striking, and this spirals the story into so many interesting directions that you don't really see coming. This is the primary reason why the show was consistently riveting. The writers were not pulling their punches, and there wasn't an ounce of filler. I'd only say the first episode felt a little slow in this regard, but after that point, the show doesn't let up. Now, from an overall plot and story perspective, I do have some issues, but those would be going into spoilers, and I'll save that for the end of the video. But going back to the characters, I really like how the writers were able to make Oswald sympathetic. At first I was like, okay, they're just going to use the fact that he cares for his mother to give him more humanity, and then he'll be a generic bad guy outside of that. But they ended up going beyond that with how Oswald rationalizes the bad things he does. He kind of operates more as this corrupt politician of sorts instead of a bland gangster, and he's this master at manipulating people with his warped philosophy. He's this inspirational figure who is constantly fighting and championing for the underdog, and this aspect of his character is commendable. Now, whether or not he's lying and is just doing this to get more support is up for debate, and I definitely like the direction the writers take his character in the end. Revisiting Oswald's mother, Frances, there's a surprising amount of depth that gets introduced between her and Oswald towards the end, which has some great payoff to say the least, while also revealing more about Oswald's character and his hidden and twisted motivations. His overall character arc is so gutting in the end, and this is really punctuated through his mom and also Victor. Victor is his own character, but the way he impacts and draws out certain emotions and characteristics from Oswald is very intriguing. At first I thought that Victor was nothing more than this plot device for Oz to exposit to, and to kind of take this kid under his wing, which would also make Oz more sympathetic, but after episode 3, we finally see Victor's backstory and his likability skyrocketed for me. Also, by the end, I came to really love the dynamic between Oz and Victor, in which they both draw out the opposite sides of each other's characters. Like, Victor is a constant reminder of warmth and family for Oz, which kind of grounds him from turning into a full-blown villain, and Oz pushes Victor into being more courageous, bold, and outgoing. This character pairing may be pretty simple, but their fundamental juxtaposition is extremely intentional for how they progress and what their endpoints are. They exponentially gain more depth as the show goes on, and the ending for their characters is pretty much the peak of the show. Like, I honestly wouldn't want to see a season 2 since the ending was perfect, but I said the same thing for Shogun and hey, here we are. So yeah, the character work within the Penguin is phenomenal, and the top-notch acting somehow elevates the quality even further. I also think it's insane that Sophia Falcone kind of became one of my favorite DC villains, and the fact that that's the case, given how stacked Batman's rogue gallery is a testament to how great the writing is. Going into the plot and story vaguely first before spoilers, I think the story was well paced and had a surprising amount of suspense, which is really hard for origin stories. Primarily because we know where the character is heading and what his outcome will be. However, the way to get around this that the writers perfectly achieved is leveraging the unknown variables in the story to maximize the suspense in the narrative, like the fates of everyone surrounding Oswald. We may know how Oswald's story may pan out in the sense that he's becoming this criminal overlord, but we don't know how Francis, Victor, and Sophia will fare in the story. That and Sophia kind of has her own mini arc that's kind of separate from Oswald, and that felt fresh and unpredictable. Like, it's crazy to me that she kind of outshines Oswald in his own show to a degree. But going back to the plot, the first half of the show I think partially eclipses the second half because there's a stronger through line of suspense. I'm going to start going into spoilers now, so be warned, but I think the first half where Oswald was trying to manipulate every member of the Falcones and different gangs simultaneously was way more engaging than him kind of sitting around and setting up his operation. Here, the tension is so high as Oswald is constantly improvising and is always on the verge of death and being found out. Seeing him cleverly claw his way out of situations is what really made me get sucked into the show. Like in episode 2 where he's trying to throw the scent off his trail and pin the rat title on someone else. The writers perfectly come up with great points of conflict and force the characters to change their plans, which further makes the story more exciting and dynamic. The last half of the season doesn't have this aspect as much, which isn't a bad thing. However, I think some of the plot points get a little absurd. I know a lot of people are treating the show as a masterpiece, but I'm trying to bring a level-headed critique to the writing. So, one plot point of note is Salvatore Maroni strolling into Oswald's lair and trying to take it over with like 6 men. Which is just insane if you thought that was actually going to work out. And this kind of behavior would be expectant of someone who's younger, is rash, doesn't have as much experience. But he seems old and has a lot of experience, so this seems like a major point of conflict that gets resolved in a pretty convenient fashion. Another minor point is no one seeing the car bomb coming. It felt a little obvious, but I guess this is more forgivable. However, the weirder aspect is right when Oz goes to the surface, he's immediately found by the detective, which felt very jarring and was as if he teleported to his location. There's also the issue of Batman not being alerted to any of this. Like, on one hand, I respect the show for not relying on Batman at all, but to a certain extent, it gets to a point where these story events are so seismic to the point that it starts to become questionable when Batman doesn't show up. Like, if you don't want to include Batman, then you have to limit your story to a smaller scale, and I think the show partially compromises that towards the end. Then, I think one of the worst examples for the writing is Oz somehow managing to escape Sophia in the finale. It was very clear that the writers wanted to have this confrontation, and to be fair, it was a great confrontation given that it was an emotional climax between 2 characters. But the only way for the story to function after this was Oz escaping. So the scene very clearly highlights his plot armor in that he should have died here, but the writers made it to where he breaks out of his restraints and is able to overpower 3 henchmen while in this position. It's also kind of ridiculous that he murders the corrupt detective outside in broad daylight in front of a bunch of witnesses, and nothing comes of that. It feels kind of cheap that they played that off as a joke, and that's just such a head-scratching decision. There's a few other minor things that bothered me, like Salvatore easily breaking out of prison, and all of the gangs simultaneously coming to the conclusion that they want to kill and replace their leaders. which that point in particular removes any kind of nuance, and all of these second-in-command characters being on the same page in terms of loyalty and motivations is flat out unrealistic. So for me, all of these kind of add up to the point that the last couple of episodes have a sloppy execution. However, I think the points of payoff, especially in relation to the characters, are still strong. I think most people won't be bothered by these things, and I can already see the dislikes heading my way. But yeah, I still really enjoyed The Penguin, and while most people are calling this the best show of 2024, I'd personally point to Shogun being better. Thanks for watching, and sorry that this video isn't that long, but I just felt like making a succinct 10-minute video to respect your time. My Letterboxd, Discord, and Patreon links are in the description, and have a great day. Thank you incredibly to my top patron, Logan Farmer.